Hello, this is the second episode of our Exploring Consciousness series in IMI Radio. And maybe you know, but you're listening to Giant Steps. And why? Because what we were trying to do with you, like here, it's kind of giant step. And also we should introduce ourselves in the in the start. At first, I would think I'm Anna Brykczyńska
and I'm Julek Hebanowski.
Yes, and we are continuing our hard journey through this uneven topic. So why is it giant step? Because we actually, for me, it was giant step to start to do this and doing this broadcast. And whole week when I was trying to figure out what should be the start, because after the pilot episode we should start with something that is elementary to the problem, and it appears that it's so multidisciplinary topic. So it's also because if we're talking about consciousness, we should think about what is the medium, the form, like where is consciousness exist, in what kind of form. So I was thinking about a being or entity definitions in philosophy, which is quite hard, so I didn't manage to make the full research. So you like today is have a few examples of what are the view on these fields of philosophy that are considering the understanding of nature of mind, mental states, and subjective experience. What can be the examples of these terms?
Yes, so I wanted to show like different views to approach consciousness, and I wanted to start by introducing this problem in philosophy of mind known as the hard problem of consciousness, which it's hard because it shows the difficulty of different views which we have to actually explaining consciousness. So I think I would start with like just defining consciousness on the start to like make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to what we are trying to even explain. So there is like this distinction between the secondary consciousness and first order consciousness, and secondary consciousness is when people refer to self-awareness, to the awareness like when you have awareness of your own experience, of your own internal processes, and that's more like a human characteristic and maybe some more advanced animals. But the hard problem of consciousness is focused on the phenomenal consciousness, or like on the qualia, which refers to subjective experience, to having any experience at all. Or like there's this philosopher Thomas Nagel which used the example of what it feels like to be a bat. So like the bat is like some kind of like an animal that barely uses its vision and has probably very different experience from ours, but we can imagine that there's some experience to be a bat. So I would start with like maybe like briefly introducing some of the views. There is like in the history of philosophy of mind, one of the view that often that kind of began with Descartes and even before Descartes, and that many people have intuitively about consciousness is dualism. And dualism is basically the view that there is matter, there's the things that consist of matter, and there is the mind, and these are ontologically distinct. They're made from different kind of stuff, and they're in some kind of interaction. And this view is popular for a lot of people intuitively, but in modern brain research, it's often looked down upon. We generally speaking deflate this kind of ontological boundary between these two domains. It is as seeming more illusory, and that mental states are actually brain states. So dualism also can be like distinguished in different like substance dualism, like the two substances, like I mentioned before. There's also property dualism, which is kind of similar to monism, which I will get to next. It's basically the idea that there's one substance, but it has two property, a physical property and a mental property. And there's also epiphenomenalism, which often comes up in different discussions about the mind. And epiphenomenalism says that consciousness exists, it's ontologically distinct, but the interaction between matter and consciousness is kind of one way. Like matter, the brain states define mental states, but the mental states do not influence brain states. It's just the brain states. And there's like this analogy I came up with as a shadow of a clockwork machine. We can have like a clockwork machine that operates, but it also casts a shadow, and the shadow kind of reflects what is happening in this machine, but it doesn't actually influence anything that is happening in the machine. So that's dualism. And as opposed to dualism, like on the other side, there is monism. And monism is the idea that...
yeah, I'm just listening. I'm trying to process. So.
Okay. So monism is the idea, like the dualism is basically you have two kinds of stuff, the material and mental, and monism is the idea there is one kind of stuff. And depending on what's the nature of that kind of stuff, you also fall in different camps. So for example, there is materialism, and materialism says that all that exists is matter, and matter is this like brute stuff. It has no qualitative properties. It can arrange itself in molecules and organisms, but matter itself has no consciousness. There is idealism. Idealism in philosophy of mind is that actually it's all mind. Everything is made of mind, and matter is kind of like an appearance in the mind that we empirically kind of learn by interacting with the world, and things appear as material, but the appearance is actually a mental thing. And there is neutral monism, and neutral monism says that there is one kind of stuff, but it is kind of like property dualism. Interestingly enough, is that there's one kind of stuff, but it can have the property of being mental and the property of being material, but ultimately it's like this undefined substance behind all of this. And those like the broad philosophical landscape. In the 20th century, the views kind of began to be more subtle or more defined. And with the development of psychology, the behavioral psychology, one very popular view that used to be, especially in the second half of the 20th century, was behaviorism. And behaviorism basically focuses only on behavior, on the input and output, like what was the condition in which the animal was, and how did it act in those conditions, and everything that happens between input and output, all the internal processing and assessments and the mental phenomena are ignored by behaviorists. And there's also like an interesting fun fact about cognitive science is that cognitive science was kind of born from the failure of behaviorism. There was this cognitive revolution in the 50s that basically had to acknowledge that behaviorism ignores a quite important part of like our life, like all the internal mental processes. So there was this doctrine of the mind as a computer, the brain as a computer, and that's where cognitive science was born. But behaviorism, at the time, it made sense because back when we didn't have the tools to really investigate what happens in the brain, then we could still learn a lot from behavior. There is functionalism, and functionalism is a view also in philosophy of mind that is basically the most popular one today. Like when you ask any neuroscientist or brain scientist, then chances are probably more than 50% that, or more than 70% even, that they're a functionalist about brain and consciousness. In philosophy of mind, it is also the most popular view, but the percentage is not as high. It's like 30% of philosophers of mind subscribe to functionalism, and it's the view that consciousness exists, but it's can be reduced to functional properties. So it's, in other words, it's also called as a substrate neutral view, because it says that consciousness does not depend on what a given system is made of, but what it does, what is its function. So if you have like a very complex machine made of even gears and mechanical stuff, then as long as it does the same function, as it can respond to stimuli, etc., then even such a kind of lifeless substrate as would seem, according to functionalists, would have to be conscious as long as it makes that function. There is also emergentism or non-reductive physicalism, which kind of is opposed to functionalism in some sense, that you can have novel behaviors, novel ontological properties, which are not reducible to individual components, and there's like this idea that the whole is larger than the sum of their parts. There is also panpsychism, which interestingly also has some more recognition in the recent, let's say, 2 decades, that basically the mind is actually a universal property that exists. It's a fundamental property, and that it's kind of a natural kind. It's like exists, and it is not something fuzzy, emergent on a higher level. It's also not like just a property of a function, but it exists in of itself. And yeah, there's a lot of criticism that people in brain sciences give to panpsychism, but there's also interesting overlap between panpsychism and modern theories of consciousness. So,
Okay.
a jeszcze mogę też. Dobra. So I would like to also mention some conditions that, generally speaking, people think of when they think what a given system would have to have in order to be conscious. So people, generally speaking, they think about complexity, like a system has to be complex enough, or that a system has to have some kind of self-representation, or that it has to have a specific kind of reportability or reactivity, some kind of behavior, or that it has to have embodiment. There are many different conditions people give, and the hard problem of consciousness basically goes over these conditions and kind of explores how they by themselves don't really entail consciousness. It's just that we associate these characteristics with consciousness, but they don't by themselves imply it. Like when we say that something is complex enough, and the complex is really, it's not a natural kind, it's not a hard defined criterion. It's more like you need to have an observer which deems something as complex enough, or like behavior. It's also behavior is also a bad example to talk about consciousness, because we can think of all these examples when, for example, people who have something called as the locked-in syndrome, when they have like a coma, but they're still aware, or like they're paralyzed and they cannot behaviorally express anything, but they can still feel and experience and think. So that's also not a great way to define consciousness. There is self-representation, but that again would refer to like the secondary consciousness as this kind of ability of the system to analyze its own internal states, but that ability is actually not necessary to have qualitative experiences. Like you don't need to think about having pain when you have pain in order to be aware of that pain. Like you can just experience pain, and the second layer of thought is like optional. There is the idea that maybe it comes with embodiment, but no, there's also problems with that. Like, how would embodiment entail consciousness? Like, I can activate your neurons in your brain directly without external stimuli, but directly in the brain, and you won't be able to tell the difference between something that happened out there in the environment or in in or not. Like it's identical because the information in the end goes to brain anyway. So basically, the hard problem tackles all these ways of looking of consciousness that treat it as something functional or computational or structural, that you can essentially take something that has no conscious properties, no qualitative properties, arrange it in a certain way, and somehow consciousness, this ontologically new property, appears. And this also points to an interesting problem that is related with emergence. There's this philosopher, Jaegwon Kim, who talked about the problems of emergence and how we often misinterpret or like have too much confidence in how real emergent properties are. And to give an example is like when we look at a swarm of birds on the sky, and it appears to move in a way that has like this holistic behavior, it has a shape to it. It looks like like a whole in a sense, like something that is beyond the sum of the parts. And but if you look at every individual bird, then you see that actually each bird just corrects distance to the neighboring birds, and by looking at the individual components, you can explain the behavior of the whole. And this is also the distinction that's, I think, important to draw between something called weak emergence and strong emergence. So weak emergence says that you have these emergent properties, but they are in principle reducible to the lower levels, how they interact with themselves. And strong emergence says the opposite. Like you have these emergent properties and they are not reducible. Like you cannot look at the lower properties and from them just deduce the whole. Like the whole appears when all the puzzles are stick together, and then like it's a problematic view. It's a problematic view because we don't really have examples of strong emergence in nature, except for what people think consciousness. Like strong emergence, generally speaking, is what some people think that consciousness is, because we don't have anything else. And this is also this problem that relates to this concept of an explanatory gap, that how from matter, from something that has no phenomenal properties, you can get something that has these phenomenal properties. It's the ontological gap between these two, and people try to explain it in many ways. So with emergence, it can also explain, weak emergence can explain a variety of phenomena, like also like living organisms. Like when we look at living organisms, technically speaking, they all also reducible to how individual cells interact with themselves, and how even within the cells you can reduce it further, how molecules and proteins, how all of that stuff flows and sticks together. And very quickly we can arrive to this very kind of weird view that the wholes, like the emergent properties, they do not have existence in of themselves. Like a bird doesn't exist above the cells doesn't exist above the molecules, and this leaves us with only the simplest really.
I think also I think there also with quantum physics, like with kind of a new view from only Newtonian physics to the quantum physics. We actually have a different view on how the particles, how the particles are behaving.
Mm-hmm.
So also, even like, it's also, I think it's hard to really tell where we should stop in the considering of the more and more elementary elements.
Yes. In quantum physics, they don't even have like a hard boundary distinction between particles. It's more like you have this wave function, and the waves they do not have hard boundaries. Like you have this wave that evolves everywhere at the same time according to the Schrödinger equation, and that leaves us with a pretty weird view. And in philosophy, it also is called as the mereological nihilism. It's basically the idea that the wholes don't exist altogether. That really, like when you have, for example, a chair and you throw it into the fire and it starts burning, then like at what point it stops being a chair? You can't really define, because the whole, in some sense, it exists in your mind. It's like how you categorize things in the world. and that actually connects to the Gestalt psychology, which tried to define these properties. It would call it as the principle of emergence, or the principle of closure, that if things appear to be kind of connected, then the mind will impose the interpretation of the whole above the parts, which doesn't have to actually exist out there. And this psychological property can be so strong that intuitively we do take emergent things to exist. Like actually, like we just assume that a chair exists or a bird exists, but we don't think about the individual atoms or cells. I think that the reason would be like just like economy of attention. Like for example, when you have a lion that has to track a lot of zebras, it's easier for the lion to just track the whole instead of trying to individually look at every component. It's like something that
I think it's kind of processing limit.
Yeah.
So because if we have too many small elements like working with each other, you cannot count every reacting with each other. You cannot count every reaction between every atom.
Yes.
So it's maybe for now it's the limit. With maybe quantum computers someday will be in the use. That's gonna change, but then a lot can change with them. So
yes, I think I still like because of that. Talking about emergent properties is still very useful. Like it's useful to talk about biology and chemistry, and reducing everything to quantum physics would be not very useful. It wouldn't explain that much. But it's interesting because in the end, the gestalts still exist. Maybe they don't exist out there, but they still exist in the mind. Like it's fascinating that the brain can do this thing. It's actually very computationally non-trivial to explain how the brain is capable of taking that stuff and creating these wholes, these things that seem like the whole is more than the sum of the parts.
Actually, it's kind of related to how artificial neural network works, because there are hidden layers where like the processing part is taking place, but you cannot see the inside of it. You don't know how it's going, how it's happening. So it's the hidden layer in which you don't know. You cannot see how your program, or like it's more complicated than a program actually, but how this neural network, artificial neural network, is taking this decision, is making this process to the end.
Okay, that's very interesting, because actually this specific question is quite controversial in modern research on the mind, and I will get to it shortly because it's actually very interesting. I would just also want to finish that the hard problem of consciousness as it is can be insufficient in talking, like it's maybe not insufficient, but it's like too broad and too general. And there is this interesting comparison that I heard of some time ago, that you can imagine that in ancient Greece they used to think that everything material is made of 4 elements: the fire, earth, water, and air. And you can imagine that for an ancient Greek, he would came up with something like the hard problem of matter, because this view of 4 elements doesn't really allow you to explain all the phenomena, so they have this hard problem of matter. But in modern day, nobody would talk about the hard problem of matter. Like we have chemistry, we have metallurgy, we have all these sub-disciplines that deal with specific sub-problems. So some researchers did exactly that. They tried to tackle the hard problem by talking about the sub-problems of the simpler, trying to make it simpler and then attack individually these simpler elements. And one of the most important, in my opinion, sub-problems of consciousness is something called as the binding problem. And the binding problem, it relates to many things, like among others also like these Gestalt things, like how we can perceive the wholes. And basically the binding problem says that you have your perception is consisting of many modalities. Like there is vision, there is touch, there is smell, there is auditory modality. There's all of these different sense domains, and within each these domains, there are many different features that the brain has to discern and integrate. So, for example, when I look at a cup, then my brain will individually process information about the edges, about the colors, about if I move this cup, then also about the movement, and different parts of the brain will do these different processes, and then they have to be bound together into a unitary object that for me looks just like a cup. I never see like individual components of the cup. So, but there are conditions in which the binding breaks down, and some people that suffer from like simultanagnosia or like motion blindness, they cannot see some properties which in healthy individuals should be bound together. So this actually property of like different features of experience being bound together is called local binding, and there's also global binding, and global binding is about how all of your experience are occupying the same like scene or like the same experiential moment. They're like in the same environment, you could say. That it's not that I see half of my visual field separately from the other half, or like there's my different consciousness that hears and different that sees. It's actually a single experience, and this problem is very interesting, and depending on what view you have, you might have intuitively different approach. And my lecturer from university would often say he's like a strong functionalist, and he believes that actually like everything you need to explain are the functions, and this view actually is quite insufficient to talk about how the brain binds stuff, because and there's also an interesting distinction to be made between functional binding and phenomenal binding. There's a difference between something behaving as a unit, that something can, for example, talk and walk at the same time, or I don't know, like blink and think, like I don't know. It's like you can behave as a unit, you can do many operations at the same time, but phenomenal binding is about how all this information is within the same experience. It's something more on the ontological level, on the level like of like it actually is contained within the same experience. And maybe to go also like a little, like to diverge a little bit, is to mention there's this way to think about computational systems called the Mars levels of analysis. It basically says that any computational system can be viewed from like these three approaches. Like there is the computational level, which is about what a given system does, like does it sort numbers, or does it lift heavy things or something. There's the algorithmic level, which is about what algorithm is this system using to do this computation, and there's the implementation level, which is about what it is made of. Like, for example, is it a neural network? Is it a biological brain? Is it a quantum computer? Like, these different systems are made of, they're using a different implementation for these algorithms. And basically, you can have many systems that can, for example, may be made of the same stuff, but are doing different things or using different algorithms. You can have different systems that use the same algorithms, but are made of the different stuff. So this is a good way of thinking about it, because functionalism would basically say that you just have to focus on what the system does or what algorithms it is using. It doesn't focus on the implementation. And there is probably some problems with that. But in order to explain phenomenal binding, like how our experience is possible to be unified in this way, to experience gestalts and have this kind of sense of our kind of the world appearing at once to us, we need to probably go to the implementation level, which to a lot of brain researchers might feel, especially those that are committed to functionalism, this might feel like a stretch, that you actually don't need this look at the implementation level, but there is a strong case to be made that you need to really look at what the system is made of in order to explain these very basic and fundamental properties of that we experience, which are responsible for things like seeing gestalts, like looking at the wholes, and yeah, that's yeah.
Okay. We touched a lot of topics, but like the topic of okay, the topic of measurement. So the topic of what is elementary, bringing to me the topic of how to measure. This is the branch that's actually the field that actually interests me the most. That's also my idea for publication. How to measure, like because you need to create a specific range of conditions that you can measure, and whole of the world need to agree on this range of conditions and conduct the experiments based on these conditions. So I think it's very hard task to define such a wide topic. Also such a sub topic that it's like it's experienced. You cannot create like an objective opinion about it, because this is about subjectivities, being subjective. So I was thinking maybe we can try to find a coding system, language system to describe it. So maybe the human language, natural language, is not the best one to, like the language that is what we think about when we say language. It's not the best idea to describe these measurements. Mathematics is a perfect system. And also when you were talking about functionalists, so functionalists kind of exists in logic, also in mathematical logic, and they create, I think, the most the most common used, I would say, the most known logical system. There is a lot of them, but one of it's the one that maybe you know. It's talking about the true and false statements and the relations between them. So and the relations between them. So this is just one of the views on how the informations are relating with each other. So when we get through the problem of coding, of measurement, and of the problem of what to measure, we also need to get to a problem of how to measure each species, because every species have different perception. So, for example, bats are going to have different methods than human, or insects. Actually, we don't know what kind of methods we can use in them.
Like that kind of difficult to imagine, like what it is like to see the world with sound.
To see the world with sound, yes, or to feel the world with. Yes, to feel the word by sound.
Yeah, it's like, I think that would be more accurate. So yeah, I think actually I do think that if we want to like really explain experience, then we need to probably look more on the side of mathematics and maybe information science, and this also like requires to like make like what do we really want to explain when we talk about consciousness? Because if you are, for example, like a very strict materialist, if you're like, it's called like an eliminativist position about consciousness, is basically the idea that everything when you relate to experience, it's like a high-level illusion, that it's like just a brain modeling what it experiences, but it doesn't, like the redness of red doesn't really exist. It's like some receptor activation, or like the experience. This idea that consciousness is like a high level fuzzy abstraction. It's not like a natural kind, and that it doesn't, like it's the view that that I am more in favor of. It's a qualia realist view. It's like I tend to think of subjective experience as something that, even though it's subjective, even though it's kind of very difficult to investigate, it's still in a sense very real. It's like it exists. It's like even when I have a state of consciousness which is very which feels very difficult to disclose, or it's like very confusing, or like mad, or even when I hallucinate, it's still like there's an objective experience that is there. It has like objective properties, and intrinsically it is subjective. That's true, but it has a certain structure which is not subjective in the sense that it's just what I feel like to be. It's like what I feel like to be is the structure of my experience. And depending, like, if we want to analyze experience as this concrete thing, then I do think like the language of mathematics, the language of physics, and possibly information science is probably going to tell us a lot more. Yeah, there are actually some studies that try to find relationships between different qualia, like subjective experiences themselves. Like, for example, they look at the state space of color, and they try to look at how different colors relate to each other by looking at the unit of measure is like just noticeable difference. So you give people like the different colors, and they have to organize by how subjectively different they feel. And actually, a lot of like regularities we can find by that kind of method.
Oh yes, I wanted to tell that why at some point there was a need to define consciousness. There was a question about subjective experience and as you said at the start, you made kind of a good analysis of how the view changed. And also if the need of defining consciousness, from what kind of intentions it's raising up? Is it inhuman? Is it very egoistic intention of understanding ourselves? Or I hope so, it's more empathic view on understanding others.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't know it yet. Also, what I would like to gain at some point is to really create the good translators, the good studies about vocalization of non-human, so we can actually try to translate, and then we can see if the differences that we're kind of seeing now, or we don't know if they are existing actually, are based on real differences on cognitive abilities, or it's just our inability to communicate, to understand their subjective view. So.
Yeah, I actually think that like research in consciousness, it has like a lot of ethical importance to it, and this is why I'm also worried about how popular functionalism is, because functionalism sees very intellectually appealing when you analyze the brain and you learn, oh, like there's an functional explanation for all the mental properties. You know, you have this how attention moves, how it shifts, how vision is visual input is processed, how auditory, how olfactory input is processed, how all of that stuff, like how the brain categorizes, how associations are built, and you learn about the brain and about the physiology of the brain, and you learn that all of these mental you learn essentially that you should think about consciousness in terms of these different properties and how the brain processes them, but But if we stop referring to consciousness as something that is also like a very real and important part of the of what our brain does, or like it's something that is in the brain and is computationally important, then I think it is also becoming very difficult to talk about ethics, because functionalist approach would basically diffuse. They don't treat experience as this concrete thing, and like my professor would say that when we try to really talk about consciousness as something concrete, then he then try to refer to it as like a soul, or like this more like a spiritual thing. But I don't think that's a useful way of going about the issue. Like when we take like experiences as real, then we can take valence as real. We can talk about suffering as something real, and then we can try to define it in a way that is precise. And this actually would allow us to solve, or like at least mediate ethical disagreements, and we can do it to analyze. We can, if we had like a good like theory of subjective experience and of valence about how these experiences can be good or bad, then we could technically be able to like in theory say that, for example, how like we analyze brain activity of some rabbit, and we could tell how much suffering is in that rabbit, and by doing so I think that would be a ethically more useful approach to studying consciousness.
Yeah, I was also thinking what use in practical life these studies, these experiments these researches would have, because when we think about researches, it should have any practical use. And like for now, the practical use is it's just understanding better. But for me, I think it's also can be future cooperation vision. So we can just kind of build a common system, manage a common system with non-human animals. If we'll be able to put an apparat or like something that is going to translate like made a live translation of what our pupil, for example, our animal pupil is thinking, want to tell us, maybe it will reach a point of actually working together. I don't know, working on building a farm or working on common projects together. So I think that's the goal.
That's interesting. I think actually maybe that might be possible, like to have a better way for animals who can have the linguistic abilities as humans to have like methods to communicate internal states more efficiently. And I think that's actually a quite interesting and realistic way to go about it. There is this philosopher David Pearce who also like wants to tackle it in a very practical way from a different perspective. He talked about biotechnology, how we can use biotechnology for increasing the well-being of animals. I think that there are some interesting, definitely, applications that can emerge if we have this qualia realis approach to consciousness. Yeah. So no, I think we went today through a lot of interesting topics, and I can also recommend to check the works of David Pearce. He has some interesting work about how we can use like the practical approach to suffering, and how we can improve our experience like with technology that we have today. There are some possible avenues to be explored here.
I hope that time was inspiring for some of you listening. And that soon in our studio there is going to be also my cat or the birds like from outside the window. But in the meantime, we need to finish the broadcast, and in the next week we will see what's gonna happen, because it's like it's a such a wide topic. It's we really need to think about how to proceed with being precise but also holistic.
Yes.
So thank you very much for listening today. I'm Anna Brekczyńska and
I'm Julek Chybanowski.
have a nice day and a nice life. Thank you.
See you.